Welcome to the Eddie Network Podcast, and I'm your host, Ed Breniger. My guest today is Jeffrey Funk, retired business professor from Japan and Singapore, who is the author of a book on innovation, or the lack of it, or the inadequacy of it, called Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles. We have a very interesting conversation, not what I expected, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to find someone who thinks differently than is what is normally expected from business professors. I think as a result, it makes for a very interesting conversation that you will enjoy today. So please hit the like button, sign up for the YouTube and the Substack versions of the podcast. And here is my conversation with Jeffrey Funk. I don't have an agenda. I don't know what we should talk about. I'm figuring you're gonna
Well,
suggest.
I was asked to talk about AI
Okay,
and AI investments and why I think the AI bubble is going to burst.
you don't think it will burst.
I think it will burst.
You will burst.
Yeah, it will
Okay.
burst.
Um, so we're going to talk about AI
Yeah.
and the
I
context.
just published a book, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles, which was mostly about the startup bubble a few years ago popping. So there's a lot of bubbles that have popped. It's not just the startup bubble, but then all these technologies, VR, AR, blockchain, none of them have worked out. Electric vertical takeoff and landing. It's a long list of these things. Hyperloop. So,
Okay, so let me put this into a context. And the context is the let's say going back to post World War II
yeah.
and the nature of innovation since over the last 80 years. And in particular, I'm thinking about Everett Rogers' book, Diffusion of Innovations,
Oh, I know. Yeah.
and how that might, because a lot of people that will watch this will have read that.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, I talk about it in my book. That's because that's a very good book. He talks about these first applications, killer applications. He talks about how then they spread. We can't find that with generative AI. It's like, well, what's the big one? Well, it's and then everybody gets all waves their hands and
so, in your book, you've identified a set of different innovations that have had a nice start but didn't weren't sustainable into a second generation or a third generation. Is that correct?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And okay, so let's talk about that because
Okay.
I'm really interested in that because you know my my sense is that I'm not an AI guy. Um,
Everybody's an AI guy now. It's so big that everybody
well,
is.
everybody has
I
the
know what you're
experience
saying,
of
but
AI, but I don't use it intentionally as a replacement for something else.
no.
Yeah. So let's talk about a set of these different innovations that have kind of started well, but then weren't able to sustain the growth or the application. Is that a way to say it?
Well, I'm not sure they even started well.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
just your give us a 5 minute kind of overview or a 10 minute overview of whatever it is that you have been seeing that has brought you to write this book and what you've been seeing because you know you're an American but you've been living in Asia for the last what 40 years, 30 years.
Yeah. So I think there's been a big slowdown in innovation over the last 30 years, and I'm not the first person to say this. So Robert Gordon, author of The Rise and Fall of American Growth, he published a book in 2016 that got a lot of attention. He basically said this, and that's kind of what I've been seeing for a number of years. And so a lot of startups, there's record amounts of money were poured into startups, venture capital pouring money into startups over the last 10 years. And yet the only real startup that's doing real well financially is Uber, that was founded in the last 20 years. And it's hard to say that's really a technological marvel. It's mostly making a profit because all of these train and bus systems were shut down during the lockdowns. So it's not like it's created the value for investors, consumers, like semiconductors did, like computers did, like LEDs or um, lasers. There's a whole set of innovations that have occurred since World War II that really have produced a lot of value, mobile phones and things. And nothing recently. I mean, the last great innovation, I think, really was the smartphone. I mean, maybe you say the tablet computer after that. There was the iWatch from Apple, which is pretty good.
Those are
And you
derivative.
have,
But those
pardon?
are derivative of the smartphone, really. They're not.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a whole set of innovations that were driven by Moore's law, that you got all this better computing power, and then you put it in an electronic product, and they got smaller and smaller and better and better. So there was a whole set of those great innovations. But it hasn't continued. Virtual reality, augmented reality. They were supposed to be, the next thing that came after the smartphone, but it didn't work out. There was a bunch of optics there that required a different set of innovations that didn't happen. It didn't just depend upon integrated circuits like like the smartphone and all those computers did, and the internet.
Is I hope I asked this question the way it's happening in my head. Is the problem that that these innovations don't have a place to go really, unless you take them and you apply them to in other contexts rather than in the specific context for which they were created?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. One reason is that we don't have these science-based technologies coming out, these integrated circuits, transistors, lasers, all of these things that really create a lot of value. And we're able to create, other products. They were embedded in products. And so they made these other new products possible. So that's not occurring. I mean, and if you're going to look at the latest science-based technology, you might say the lithium-ion battery, which led to electric vehicles, or solar cells. But that work was done 80s and 90s. It's not recent. Um, so that's one reason. Another reason is that all of these recent technologies, or most of them, companies have really tried to shoot for the moon and tried to do things way too soon. You got to do things step one, step two. You got to find the first customer, the second customer, and Apple kind of did that well, and also Musk with the Starlink. That's had some success, a few million subscribers. But a lot of these VR, AR, blockchain, Hyperloop, well, they were just shooting for the moon. And even with AI, right? They were telling us they were going to have doctors put out of business 10 years ago, right? This is what the IBM Watson was supposed to do. Then there was self-driving vehicles that were supposed to be everywhere 10 years ago. They're not yet. And so and you can't really do that. It's a very big mistake to just shoot for, everything all at once. You got to start with something simple and expand on it. And we haven't been doing that. Companies haven't been doing that. And even now with AI, it's all these incredible claims that are being made about how we're all going to be out of work from Chat GTP, as if the output of our industries is all text and images. No. I mean, yeah, there's some industries that do that, the movie industry and the book industry and things, but most of us are doing other things. I mean, cars, that's also it depends on a whole set of other technologies, all these manufactured products, healthcare, mining, fishing, agriculture, all depends on some other things, some other science. And so these claims are ridiculous. People keep making these claims they're going to be all out of work. They release studies that say that, oh, yeah, we just showed that it's so much greater than the existing method. And then you go into this, look at the studies closely, and well, it doesn't really say that. And so we end up having this incredibly hyped conversation at the macro level. And unfortunately, the media buys into a lot of this stuff. It just repeats whatever a tech executive says, and we don't get anything, or we don't get as much as we used to get.
The context that you're talking about, I call the spectacle the real. So everything is made turned into a spectacle that is intended to capture our attention and paralyze us from any real decisions we must make because the next spectacle will be along in about 3 seconds.
Yeah.
It's this.
No, I think that's a good way to put it. Spectacle from the real. Yeah,
And so the question, to me, I mean, I didn't grow up in the world of science. I didn't grow up in the world of business. I began my career as a minister, but I found that I was not well suited to parish ministry because I was interested in change. I like change, innovation,
uh,
and I mean not change for change's sake, but change that has a purpose to it. And I see that we're always in transition. So, but the question is, where are we going with that? How do we? And I think the big question that we're not answering, but it's beginning to be discussed, is what is the human factor in all of this? How do human beings take something like AI and maximize it for the benefit of humanity and not for the benefit
yeah,
of whatever the machine is?
yeah. No, I agree. And part of the problem is that these AI companies have been hyping this AI up so much that they've scared everybody. So, now everyone's thinking, oh my God, we're all going to lose our jobs. My kid, what should he study? Maybe he shouldn't even study because all he has to do is use AI. And so this hype, it completely works against us. It completely, not only does it shoot for something that isn't possible in the near term, and you have to solve problems. You find the easy one, the first customer, the second customer, the third customer. I mean, that's the way you need to solve things. But it also just scares everybody. So we
Yeah.
have a society, even engineers and scientists, they think, wow, there's not going to be any coding jobs left. Well, there are actually going to be. That's the problem. And people say this. And so the debate becomes really ridiculous, really just kind of so mushy and so vague and superficial. But this is kind of the way the tech sector wants the narrative, the discussion to proceed. They don't want any kind of criticism. They don't want anybody else to be involved with the discussion. They want to be saying everything and saying how things are going to happen, and they want to be in charge. And they're trying to overwhelm us with all this and trying to scare us so much.
Well, it when that happens, it takes away their accountability. They're not.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
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 And that's what I see. And I think as I've thought a lot about innovation and and that's and some people go back to the 70s, that there was some date in 1971 when everything changed and the innovation stopped. And I think they were tying it to going off the gold standard, but I don't think that was what it was. But they're going back that far to say we really haven't innovated much since then. But what I see is that we don't know what to innovate for. We don't have a reason to do it. We're just creating stuff because we can. And the question is, why are we doing any of this? And if we start asking the question why, then we begin to see application that might lead to a
Yeah.
better use of some of these technologies.
Well, a lot of these innovations are aimed at the internet and social media and mobile phones. And despite the fact that there's a lot more to the world than the internet, social media, and mobile phones, right? There's a lot of, the
Yeah.
industries you mentioned before, all the agricultural and manufacturing and mining and fishing. I mean, there's a lot of people that work in these industries. There's healthcare. Uh, But what see the AI people have done is they pushed all they've by hyping up AI so much, all the investment has gone to their industries, and in their view, uh, they're going to control everything because they're going to attach a computer to everything. You're going to have sensors that collect data. The data is going to be processed by the computers and by AI, and then they'll be in control. So to them, it's everything, all of this data analysis. So they don't really care whether you do something to the seeds to create better crop yield, or you figure out how to uh, you understand the human body a little better and the science of the body and the science of diseases, and then you can solve uh, healthcare problems, except to the extent that all of that is data to them, right? You got all this
Yeah.
data about humans, and and so in their view, everything is data. And if you don't understand data, well, you're going to be out of work and you're going to be gone, and we don't care. And of course, that scares people.
So, I mean, I think you're correct in what you're describing, and I think a lot of people are afraid, because they look at the screen, they're looking at their screen all the time, and that's where they're getting all their information. And
Yeah,
it's a very, I don't want to say it's biased because I think there's some diversity there, but I think it's very limited. It's a very
yeah,
limited picture of what is possible. And the question is, how do you overcome that? And I think one of the things that I recognize, you know, is that we're at this monumental transition in human history. And if you think about how organizations were structured going back 200 years when the Industrial Revolution was reaching and beginning to really have its effect upon the West, we're still organizing in many ways our organizations like we did 200 years ago. And we have not figured out that those structures don't work very well. And but they work well if you're totally interested in control and using machines to control. And so I feel like, I mean, you can look at schools, and the schools are still structured the way they were when I was a
yeah.
kid.
It's a good example. Yeah,
And and they're waiting, essentially waiting for a child to turn 18 before they're sent out to become an independent person, an adult. When my experience is, in some respects, kids at the age of 12 are ready to start making some adult decisions.
yeah, we are. My son's 12. We went to London and Paris together, and he made most of the decisions about getting around,
Yeah,
following the map. Very good. And I'm in a wheelchair and he's making sure we get places, and
yeah. Well, and
that's part of his education.
well, and I've mentioned this to elementary school teachers. I said I think you should be teaching entrepreneurship in elementary schools. Let them try things. Let them start businesses. And
Yeah.
and that freaks them out because none of their education is built around startup or in entrepreneurship. But that's
Well, it's built around tests and repeating what they've heard and these things. And
which is the old industrial model.
yeah.
So
But that's a lot what AI does. AI just repeats what it's been told, and so whatever it's trained on. And so a lot of these tests that AI gets tested on things, and they score higher each year on these different tests, whether it's for accounting or law or science or whatever. But then what we found out was that that's because they were just including more of these tests in their training data. They weren't getting smarter. They were just, it was kind of like, oh, we're going to give kids the test before we're going to let them look at the exam and the answers, questions and answers before they take the test. Well, of course they're going to do better. And so this is how the AI models are doing better. People figure that out that once you test them on something that's different than what they've been trained on, well, they make a lot of mistakes. and they don't do so well, and they certainly don't know how to solve problems. So it'll be a lot harder for them to replace people than we thought. Now, of course, that message still hasn't gotten down to the regular humans, right? It's kind of just at the expert level, but the experts know this, and we're pushing back against the AI companies. But a lot of journalists, right, they're only just beginning to realize this.
Uh, and so you're teaching in a university, correct?
Well, I was. I'm retired. I'm 69 now.
Oh, okay. So
I
you were,
I was a professor for years, yeah. And I
and
got my PhD from Carnegie Mellon in engineering,
oh,
back in
great.
1984. Long time ago.
So so you taught. Where did you teach at a university here in America before you went to Japan?
Yeah, I was teaching at Penn State. I did a little at University of Michigan, and then but mostly in Japan, Kobe University, Totsubashi University, and then I was at National University of Singapore for 9 years. Yeah.
And what? Let's talk about education. What's your impression about what has transpired during your career? What were you finding with the students that were coming to your classes, say in the 70s and 80s, as compared to more
Oh,
recently?
that's very hard to compare because I've taught in the US, then Japan, and then Singapore. So it's very hard to compare. And not only, different students, different countries, but different systems. So it's very hard to compare uh, the students.
Okay, if we were to put that into the context of being prepared to deal with the world as we've been discussing it, what do you see in terms of the students?
Well, I believe what I hear that a lot of people claim that kids can't write as well. They can't do critical thinking as well. They don't read as many books. So this has been said for a long time. They're looking at their phone too much. Now, of course, with AI, they're using AI too much to write papers. They're not writing enough themselves. So that whole kind of summary, that whole kind of generalization about students, I believe it. It's you read it everywhere. It's really nobody disagrees with that.
Well, I have a lot of interaction with young adults, and I agree with that. And I think the things that I find that they're frustrated with is that the fact that they weren't taught these things, and they're smart. They're smart, but they're just not learned.
No, I agree. It's not like they're lazy and that somehow there's a big problem. That's the problem with them. The problem is that their parents failed them. And this has been going on for a long time. The one thing I can tell you about universities that's common among all the three countries I worked in is that research is considered far more important than teaching.
Yes.
Universities could care less about teaching. They don't care. They don't care whether the students do well. They don't care whether they're prepared for work. They don't care whether the professors don't care whether they do well in the classroom because they're all measured by how many academic papers they publish. And there was probably more than 3 million papers published last year. It's up like 10 times from 20 years ago. And you don't need a PhD to know that, well, probably most of those papers aren't any good, right? We talked at the beginning about how we don't really see these science-based technologies coming out, but yet we got 10 times more papers coming out, right? There's a kind of a correlation there of we've got a lot of papers that don't mean anything that people are publishing because they have to publish because they're measured by that, by how many papers they publish, and they don't mean anything. And so these universities are working real hard to go nowhere. And but you cannot say this. It's very hard to say this. Even before Trump was in office, it was hard to say this. Uh, but now it's impossible because everybody's afraid they're going to get fired, right? The universities aren't going to try to think about how they can remake themselves right now because any remaking of themselves in terms of research and teaching is take years to get results. But in the meantime, they're just going to cause problems for themselves if they admit that they've been doing things wrong. So there are problems. And so the people who say there's problems are right about that. But the only way it's going to be solved is by the professors themselves. You're going to have to give them the incentives to solve it. It isn't something that we can impose on them, right?
And that's probably true in almost any industry.
Well, it is. It's very hard. You impose some rules and stuff on them, and you think it's going to make things better, but well, it usually doesn't, right? It may make a few things better, but it oftentimes makes things worse.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. I was a consultant for 20 years, and so I saw it. And what I saw, Jeff, was, and I've already kind of alluded to this already, was that the structure was the inhibiting factor. So you had people who wanted to learn, and you had people who wanted to have good relationships at work, but the structure of these organizations didn't allow for it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
their purpose was pretty much transactional, and you're hired to fulfill this role, and if you don't fulfill the role, you're gone. And I mean, and it's really a dumbing down, or it's a reductionistic kind of a way to approach running anything, because
Yeah.
you're missing out on the opportunities that you can't see because you're not looking for them.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably know more about this than me because you've been working with organizations. But I agree with that. There's a lot of people who are saying the same thing. And there's you know, dumbing down jobs, making them more narrow, very silly metrics. There's a great book called The Tyranny of Metrics. We've just got so many metrics that most of them don't mean anything, and people just spend their time trying to satisfy a metric as opposed to thinking about, you know, a better product, better service, something that's going to make the company better, better processes.
So in this book that you've written about AI, where you're basically saying that it's not, well, I'll let you say what it's not been, but
Yeah.
what I'm interested in is, so what is your solution, or what is it that you think we should be doing? If what you kind of characterize as this kind of decline or demise of innovation, what does it take for us to kind of, I'd hate to say reinvent, but to renew the idea of innovation in the culture of organizations?
Yeah. Yeah, well, as I said, the lack of one of the reasons for the slowdown in innovation is the lack of science-based technologies. So that requires rethinking how we do basic and applied research, how universities are measured, how universities operate. We got too many academic papers, too many academic journals. We need to cut that. We need to get the focus on the science and not on the metric. And now I'm kind of quoting this recent Nobel laureate, Catalin Carico, who suffered through years at University of Pennsylvania because they were telling her, well, you don't get enough funding to satisfy how much floor space you have in the lab. So this is the kind of silly metric they'll have,
Yeah.
right? And she was trying to talk science and trying to explain to them, well, this mRNA, it's going to work better and blah, 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 blah. No, no, they don't want to talk about it. And these are university professors who are saying this to her because this metric has been imposed upon them. And so we need to return to the discussion of science. We need to take these silly metrics and throw them out, right? The whole purpose of university research is to produce is to just have this small percentage of really successful scientific projects, scientific technologies. Just a few. We don't care whether everybody is generating a lot of funding. No, all we care about is these few things, right? And yet they want to focus on some silly metric. So there's a whole set of changes that occur there. Now, as far as companies go, as I said, there's too much effort on this, well, 20 years down the line, this is what it's going to be like. We know this is what these technologies can do. It's going to change everything. And we don't need to really hear that message. And universities teach a lot of this. And oh, everything's going to change so fast. Well, they have to create the change. And you have to create the change by having the first product, the first company, the first user, and so on. Forget about what you think is going to happen in 20 years. It's not really important. You got to focus on right now and getting and figuring out, well, who's the most likely to pay for this? Who has the biggest willingness to pay? Who's willing to accept kind of low performance? You got to think through those things. They're very basic. Uh, Everett Rogers talks about that in his book. Then there was a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore that came out 25 years ago. You're shaking heads, so you've heard of it. It's
Yep.
a very famous book. A lot of it drew from Everett Rogers. He was talking about just the first customers, the first products, very, very basic stuff. But all that's been forgotten in this kind of hype about, oh my gosh, this is going to change the whole world and put everybody out of work. We got to talk about what we're going to do when everybody's out of work. But wait a minute, wait a minute. That's not what we need to talk about. We need to talk about the first customers for this, first product.
Well, it's
So there's some very basic things that are forgotten.
we have kind of squandered our adoption model. How we adapt, or adopt new technologies. We don't
Yeah,
have really a model for that any longer. I mean,
yeah,
that's what Rogers was kind of. I mean, I came at that cold. I had never seen anything like this. I had never had a business course. I'm just curious, and I'm seeing things, and I'm going searching for answers, I've
yeah.
come across him, and then realized that this is what um, the fellow that wrote. Gosh, I'm blanking on his name. The Tipping Point wrote. He
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Gladwell. And I mean he was popularizing what Rogers was saying, you know, and
yeah,
and I've been asking the question in some of my circles lately, what if there's this adoption scale, and it reaches a peak and then it begins to fall off. Is there a is there a similar scale where we have abandon the technologies? And does that begin to grow at the same time and create the need for new technologies? That there's now a need for it, not simply people designing things coming out of their heads, but that things no longer work, and so it's like the old flip phones. They didn't service at the level that our smartphones service today. And so but I know people who are picking up or buying flip phones now because they don't want all the data retrieval coming out of their phones happening. So
yeah,
I think that I think there's room for a lot of discussion about what's happening in the larger context of what's going on with technology and science. And but the problem is that the conversation is really controlled by those who are the big players.
yeah,
And so, but if you walk into a store, or for me, it could be a business, and I'm gonna talk to people there who are not the managers. I'm gonna talk to employees. I'm gonna talk, and I'm gonna get their kind of the ground level view of things. And I ask them, so what do you think about AI? And they just shake their head. They don't know what to think. And
yeah,
so I think it's an interesting time to be alive. And
yeah. Well,
it
a lot of these AI companies, the strategy isn't to introduce a product, get some customers, and slowly build up. Their strategy is we convince the world this is the greatest thing in the world. They give us lots of money, our valuation goes up, and then we go public. We sell our shares to everybody. We're billionaires, and we let somebody else worry about whether or not whether
exactly
the company makes money or whether people benefit. It's somebody else's problem. We made our billions.
it's
And a
the
lot of these AI people, they've already made their millions, their billions. They don't need anything else. We gave it to them, right? And all these politicians who just fall over themselves to get a picture taken with Elon Musk and Sam Altman and these other people. And it's not just in America, it's in a lot of these other countries.
So what do you tell people who um speak to you about AI and about they're asking, how do I practically use this? What is it that I need to, how do I need to look at these technologies and use them for my
Right.
benefit rather than simply to conform to whatever is the expectation?
Okay. Well, first of all, there's generative AI is this kind of new form of AI that we use to generate text and pictures. There was this other AI before that. Some people call it predictive AI. It's just kind of like a big regression machine, just figuring out relationships between variables uh, and it kind of works. It's not a big deal. I mean, the stock market didn't start going up until generative AI came out. So it doesn't, the stock market's not thinking that predictive AI is that great. It's just something that's there and it continues to work and it's used in factories in a lot of places. For example, it's used to package to load trucks and trains and planes more efficiently. So you can fit all these packages together,
Yeah.
and you can get the robot can do that. So these kinds of things are very useful, right? This is very practical, very useful. But generative AI, there's things like videos that you can make, and YouTube videos, and just the ads that go in YouTube videos. So there's these videos that you can make, and the low end videos will come before the high end ones, right? The very expensive television commercials will be done with more human involvement than will the AI videos. But there's something there, and so there's a revolution going on there. Um, there's also a little bit going on in call centers. So call centers are using these AI assistants because they're you call them up and ask questions. And then there are people that just use AI assistants to figure out stuff. I mean, AI, these AI assistants are very good if you're just kind of curious about a lot of different things and you don't really care if you're going to be the expert in it, but you just kind of think, well, I'd like to know this. So you go and you look on the assistant, and it kind of gives you a summary of something. And usually the summaries are pretty good. I use them too. But the problem is that most people's jobs aren't that. Most people work on very specific thing, right? You're processing insurance claims or bank app or loan applications or something like that. It's all very, very specific. And then the generative AI doesn't really add a lot of value. But if you train the generative AI on the specific data of the business, then it can work better. So that takes time, and companies are doing this and they're moving slowly. It's just not happening anywhere as fast as the stock market thinks it will. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at the AI revenues, they're very tiny. See, people like to talk about how ChatGPT is the fastest growing technology of all time. Well, it's mostly students who are just cheating on their homework. It's not companies really adding value and improving productivity. Um, because if it was, then they would be paying for more software, but they're not. The revenues for OpenAI and some of these other startups is very small. And I know some of the AI the promoters they will say, well, it's just the early years of the industry. Right? This is a very popular thing. It's the early years of the industry. Well, not really. I mean, AI has been. I mean, uh, the first book, I think it was Race Against the Machine 15 years ago, 13 years ago, talking about AI. It was 13 years ago. All right. This isn't early. And Transformers go back a number of years. I mean, OpenAI is 10 years old now.
Yeah.
Um, and so the revenues are small. And if you compare the AI revenues to what was being generated by the internet in 2000, the year the bubble burst, there's no comparison. I mean, basically, there were about 1.5 trillion in today's dollars. So if you compare, you want to make the dollars the same. $1.5 trillion dollars generated in 2020. There's probably this year, there will probably be 20 billion generated by OpenAI software. 20 billion compared to 1.5 trillion. Right? These are hugely different
Yeah.
numbers.
That's a,
And so, it's a very easy way to judge the quality of something. I know some people they think, well, no, I want to use it, and then I'm going to tell you how good it is. But the problem with that method is that there's no one around who knows all the work in the world. There's no one who can use AI and say, hey, yeah, this is great, because I know what all the workers do in the world, and I know this is really great for all of them. No, you know what works for you, not for all those people out there. But you see, revenues, it's like a big survey of everybody. They put their
Right.
money where their mouth is. If they like the software, they buy it. And this is with anything, right? Would you believe someone who said robots are going to be the biggest thing in the world, but nobody was buying robots? Well, then you say, wait, you're crazy, right? The robots won't have a big impact until people buy them and put in the factory. And the same thing with AI. They got to buy the software, start using it, and then there'll be a big impact. But hardly anybody's buying it. So that's where my pessimism comes from. It's not that I mean, I use it and I look at it, how it works, and I read the critiques of it and stuff, but that is mostly to try to explain why the AI revenues are so small. Because the revenues are the key thing.
So what I see, and I think what you're saying confirms to me what I'm seeing, is that all this optimism is natural to human beings. We see something new
Yeah,
and we believe that, oh, this is going to make a difference. And then we test it and we see, well, it really doesn't make a difference. It actually costs us a lot to use this,
yeah,
so we abandon it. So I think we're in midstream of that with some of these technologies. And my when I when I first was a consultant 30 years ago, within the first 5 years, I had created a leadership model called Circle of Impact. Actually, is looks that like that. Three dimensions
yeah,
of leadership, all aligned,
yeah,
and all aligned for impact, meaning some kind of change that makes a difference that matters. That was my simple view of the world. But what I saw was that the structure of organizations they were not sustainable and they were going to fail. And my experience as a consultant was that the leadership of organizations would see these problems, but ultimately refuse to act on them because the discomfort of the problem itself was less of a discomfort than actually having to change.
yeah,
And so the change will be forced upon them. And so the people that I see, and I'm projecting this out to the world, that I see that have the advantage are not people who are in the tech world, but are the people who imagine what is possible and are going out to create that which is possible, and they're acting on their sense of seeing things or their ingenuity, and they're going to use the technology, but they're seeing things in a much bigger context than just the application, the utilitarian application of technology.
yeah.
And
Well, I agree.
what I saw was that what we will see emerging, and I think we're already seeing, is that a far higher level of organizations built around how people relate to one another. Relationships become more and more important in the process.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with you. It's not, but I'd like to go back to you talk about optimists, and it tends to successful people tend to be optimistic, and successful people like optimists. And so a CEO says, "Well, let me hear what you guys have to say about AI," and everybody gives their opinion. And they're really and CEO says, he looks at the most optimistic. I like your optimism. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hire you. You guys aren't optimistic enough. I think we're going to get rid of you guys. And so that just goes on in the world all the time. And it's hard when you're a pessimist, when you're saying, well, wait a minute. You know, things aren't working out the way they were saying. They're saying that they were going to work out. And so then you need change, and that gets hard, right? Nobody wants to admit, well, we were all wrong. We're going to change. We're going to do things differently now. A lot of people will stick on till the end. So you have a lot of people who have been optimistic about AI for 15 years.
Yeah.
Uh, they're going to keep being optimistic. If they go out of business, well, that doesn't matter. It's okay. My wife's saying I'm talking too loud.
Okay,
So
I've got you. I've got you excited.
so so right, we need this change, but a lot of people don't want to change. They certainly want to change the message. They're gonna these AI people are gonna take the whole country down with the ship, with the AI ship, because they refuse to change their message. They refuse to be a little more pessimistic. There's big consulting firms have been pushing this, all these McKinsey type companies. There's big universities, Stanford and MIT have been pushing this too hard, and they don't want to change.
All
They don't want
this,
to admit that they're wrong.
it's all part of a system. It's a system that
Yeah,
all interconnected,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's to your peril to break from the system. But but
yeah,
but the reality about innovation is the people who are the disruptors are the ones who end up kind of defining what the future becomes.
yeah, yeah. If they succeed, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so I encourage people to be disruptive, not negatively so, but go change something because you will make a difference, and
yeah,
at least you will wake people up to opportunities that they have
yeah.
been missing. So
Yeah, for most of my life, I agreed with you. I mean, I worked on mobile phones in Japan 25 years ago when Japan was the first country to succeed with the mobile internet
yeah,
before the iPhone came out in 2007. And so I was a big optimist. I watched all that happen. I came to NUS, National University of Singapore, to teach a number of courses. One was the economics of new technology. So I was this big optimist back in 2008. Oh, everything's going to change. And then I began to notice that a lot of these scientific technologies like carbon nanotubes and superconductors and things, they weren't getting better that fast. And I started to realize that they weren't going to succeed because they had to get better much faster every year in order for them to get good enough to be used. And so I began to become a pessimist. And then I began to learn about all these the lack of profitability at these startups. And so I began to become a pessimist. And but as I became a pessimist, other people weren't. So, particularly these big companies, they keep claiming these things that aren't happening, but they keep claiming, oh, we're living the most innovative era of all time, and a lot of this kind of stuff. And you hear that, and you begin to become very pessimistic because you realize they're not going to change. They're just going to make the same mistakes that all these companies have been making.
I think human nature is that it moves to some kind of mean, and the mean tends to be at a lower level of application or proficiency than that could be. And so, people don't use their phones to the degree that they could. If they understood all the power that's in their phone, there would be all
Yeah,
kinds of things happening. And
yeah,
but they don't. They use it as entertainment device.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, I'd like to ask my guest this one last question because sometimes it kind of rattles the guests, and sometimes they're already ready to answer it. But where do you find hope for the future, if you do? Uh, that now that you're the pessimist, but my guess is that you do have hope for the future.
Well,
Um,
I don't. You see, the problems in innovation we're talking about aren't going to kill America or any other country. It will mean slower productivity growth.
right.
The way that we can be killed is if we get in a big argument about why there's no innovation, and then we want to kill each other, right? We want to kill each other because we have this, we think that here's the reasons why the productivity is slowed down. So then we got to go out and get those guys. right? When there's a lot of reasons why productivity slowed down, right? It's very hard, but there's a lot of people who are justifiably angry that productivity slowed down. They've been impacted more than other people, so they want to find the culprits. And in trying to find the culprits, then big problems can occur, right? Uh, so that's I think the fear. And so in general, my pessimistic view of technology and adding as much productivity growth as it used to, that's not going to kill us. It's so we don't get as rich as fast as we used to. But the problem is that some people have been hurt, particularly because of the increase in inequality. So there's some people, and they're going to be mad, and we're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah, I see that very clearly, and it's the question that really drives why we should be more focused on what is our shared humanity really about.
Yeah, well, we need that message out there. So we need churches to step up and talk about this shared humanity and shared sacrifice. And there's a lot of things that um, need to be talked about and need to come from a lot of different angles.
Well, I'm glad to know you, and I appreciate the work that you've done, and I appreciate your perspective because um, I've had people on the other side on the show that see things differently, and
Yeah.
I tend not to take sides in these things, and um, I'm very realistic, I guess is so. Okay, we've got it. So what are we going to do with it? And if we
Yeah.
don't need it, I'm not going to use it, because I'm seeing it as it's not a zero sum game. It's really an investment. How much do I want to invest in not just money, but in time and mental energy and how much do I want to do that? And and what I have, and I'll just say this, what I've come to is that I'm not really interested in any version of AI answering questions for me. I'm more interested in going and finding the answers myself. And and that means that I have a huge library, and I'm looking for answers, and I'm looking for answers that what I would say fill in the gaps that I see in some of the AI answers that I've read that other friends and colleagues have shared with me. And so I'm interested in what's not being asked, and I'm asking that stuff. So, and for that reason, I have some hope for the future because I think we're, if we take a productive approach to it, we're at a very low grade level of productivity in our global society today. And unless you live in a rural community in some third world country where you're dependent on growing crops and raising sheep and as your livelihood, most people are not operating at a very high level of productivity.
Yeah.
And just a marginal increase can make a huge difference. So
Yeah.
if we can encourage people to do that. Well, thank
Okay.
you, Jeff, for being on here. And
Well, thank you for having me, Ed.
the question that Jeffrey Funk raises is whether we've really been a very innovative culture over the last 50 years. I think it's a worthy conversation to have. And I've had that question myself as I've worked as a consultant. So I commend to you the idea of whether we have been innovative enough as a culture, as a global culture, and how can we become more so if that truly is as it is, as Jeffrey Funk has shown us. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, sign up for the YouTube and the Substack versions of the podcast, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.